Hello, guys, and welcome to another edition of Cast. I am your host, Casty Streeter, and today we're doing our picks for Sunday and Monday of Week 11 in the NFL. Obviously, on Thursday, we got quite a game where the Patriots continued kind of their dominance of the season over the Jets. The Jets, I thought, oh, maybe they'll put up kind of a fight, but after, their first drive, only one more scoring drive the rest of the game. And obviously, the Patriots, I think, have a pretty good team, this year that play very, very well with one another. And I think will continue to be either hard on teams or be able to beat teams. But without further ado, let's get into the predictions. Obviously, we have the Commanders and Dolphins playing overseas in the last game that is overseas. And obviously the Commanders, not the season that I guess many expected. I actually did kind of expect a season like this, not because I thought that Jaden Daniels was going to get hurt, obviously, or that this team didn't have talent. I just overall think that the Commanders had a tough schedule this year, and without the lack of with the lack of pass rush, we look at their team and they just haven't been very good. And then I guess on top of it, you have two corners that are hurt. Trey Amos obviously is on IR. They think he's coming back in December. And then obviously Marshawn Lattimore. So their two top outside corners are hurt. And there's the Dolphins have a few injuries, but I see no reason to think that like, hey, this is a team that won't be able to perform, won't be able to beat the Commanders, and that sort of thing. And I think that Achane is having a good year. It's been overshadowed by the fact that the Dolphins have been losing quite a lot. You look at his yardage up until this point in the year, he could potentially have, through 10 games, obviously 780. He could potentially have, like a 1,400 yard season or, 1,300 yard, but most certainly a 1,200 yard season, which I think is just solid. When you're on a team that hasn't had a great offensive scheme, and you're coming off a win where you beat the Bills and you handled the Bills very well and you played with that tenacity. I think this is a bodes well for Mike McDaniels. I know that everyone thinks that he's just going to get fired and it's already kind of a done deal. I don't know about that. I do think that maybe a change of scenery for him would be good, but I'm going with Miami to win this game. And we're moving on to Bengals and the Pittsburgh Steelers. Obviously, as we know, the Bengals whooped on Pittsburgh the last time they met. It was somewhat of a close game, but the Steelers defense really didn't show up. It was in Cincinnati, of course, and Pittsburgh, obviously, at this point, they're getting knocked on the door by Baltimore. If you lose this game, you open the door for Baltimore to obviously take. I don't know if they would take the lead with the same record type of thing, but then they're in a very primary position to be able to win the division and have a host a home playoff game, obviously. But looking at this game, I think that Pittsburgh really, really, really needs to show that they still got some flair, some zeal. Obviously, the Chargers have a much better defense than Cincinnati, who they got, handled by last week. You got to have that flair that you had against Indianapolis. Not to say that the offense for the Steelers was, doing very, very well. But overall, for this game, I am going to say that I think the Steelers win. I think that for them overall, it's it is just one of these things that they really need to win. But then you look at Cincinnati and the whole Joe Burrow, I guess, kind of mess. If he does come back, but the team isn't in a playoff position, I mean, and I don't think that they're really having the mentality that, hey, we're a playoff team right now, being 3-6. Obviously, you have to get together a slew of a good amount of games, before Burrow gets back where you win, and potentially it can pull in on this division, because this division is not crazy tight, but you win here and you have 4 wins. And if Baltimore happens to lose, or who knows what, with this season, you're still kind of, semi optimistic that like, hey, we still have to play Baltimore again. And, we still have to play a good number of, games still where, we could still win. Obviously, obviously 11 or sorry, 8 games left in the year. So you're talking about, a small margin for error, but all you need is kind of that glimmer of hope. And I think that this is a game that, might be kind of a ball. The reason I'm going with Pittsburgh, though, is I really do think that their defense is going to get after Flacco this time. They're not going to let him do what they did the last time around. Moving on, we have Chargers visiting Jacksonville. I'm going with the Chargers in this game for the sole reason that Jacksonville just gave up a very, very, very fat lead. I don't have any trust in them. And I think that the Chargers, they just played against, potentially what was a better defense than Jacksonville last week in Pittsburgh. And they did pretty well. Jacksonville is disadvantaged in this game. 3-point underdogs, and they're at home. And, overall their home record hasn't been great. And the Chargers, I just think that Herbert's been doing very, very well. Vidal has been doing very, very well and efficient. I think he's one of the most efficient since getting the starting job. And I think that overall this passing game and the guys that they have are going to be able to do a good job. And obviously the Jaguars are still without Travis Hunter. So I don't really expect it to be that hard for them to contain Brian Thomas Jr. and, be able to move the ball, I guess, against this defense, who has had, to me, kind of a lackluster pass rush on the Jaguars. So I'm going with the Chargers. Buccaneers and Buffalo. This ends up being kind of a huge test game where Buffalo didn't look very good against New England, and obviously the Bills didn't look very good. They didn't look very good against the Dolphins. I would say that the Buccaneers are a little bit more battle tested out of the bye, having played the Patriots and having played, Patriots defense that has been playing very, very well. And I think that, you look at Rachaad White, I guess Bucky Irving is still out. This sucks. But I do think that you look at kind of this team, and Igbuka's been popping off. Rachaad White, I do have faith in. And the defense for the Buccaneers is better than the Buffalo Bills. I think the Buffalo Bills, I just don't know what is going on with them. Overall, Josh Allen and, Cook are having to carry this team, but they can't possibly do it by themselves. Perhaps we, get a really bold Josh Allen that does turn into Superman after a really disappointing couple of turnovers last game. And I think that Tampa Bay, if they take a game here that, many aren't expecting them to win, it'll be huge. And I think that they do really have a team that handles adversity very well. And so I'm actually picking the Buccaneers, despite them not being, favored in this game. And the Buffalo Bills are 6-point favorites, because I really don't trust the defense either of the Bills. And I think that it's just going to continue to be their downfall unless they have a drastic change. Bears, Vikings. Obviously the Bears and Vikings second meetup this year. Their first meetup in week 1 on Monday night, if we all remember. And, the Vikings didn't have to play very well. And JJ McCarthy, people say he played well in the fourth quarter. I think that it was more of a Bears collapse than, kind of a JJ McCarthy playing hero ball in his first regular season game. But going to Minnesota, who hasn't played well at home, which is ironic, I do think that Minnesota hadn't really been themselves. And I mean, you can look at their record 4-5 all you want, but I think that this is still a very, very, very talented team. And they just kind of played a doozy of a game. They played a doozy of a game against the Ravens in a game where I'm like, if you have a little bit more zeal, maybe a little bit more success, you could compete in this game, but they didn't really do that much. Not much to say in terms of injury here. Obviously, I look at kind of Chicago and that they've had injuries on the boundary where, Jalen Johnson hasn't played this year. And you look at, and I'm trying to remember, I guess, the other corner that got hurt on the other side. But overall, the Bears are banged up at corner, and they haven't had that great of a, pass rush. Obviously, Montez Sweat has 5.5 sacks, leading this year. But the Vikings, I just think they can really take it to the Bears, who haven't, if we look, have not really played teams that I'm like super high on. Obviously Baltimore, the last good team that they've played. New Orleans, it's not like they blew out they had a commanding game in this game, even though they had a 2-possession win. Washington hasn't been the team that they needed to be this year. They only won that game by 1, and it was late game theatrics. Cincinnati just sucks. Like, I'm sorry, but you're not proving anything against that defense. And then the Giants, who to me had the game, but Jackson Dart got injured in concussion protocol. So looking at this, I know people are high on the Bears and they're like, Caleb Williams is getting better. And I'm like, I want to see him up against a tough defense. And that is what I believe this is. You look at the Ravens and the Vikings, so there's the 2 tough defenses that they'll have played in a 6-game stretch. So I am actually going with the Vikings, who I think just looked out of sorts last week. But I expect Kevin O'Connell to really dial it up and for them to really get pressure on Caleb. And don't get me wrong, last week, you look at the Giants, it looked like they were getting close to getting sacks. I'm sorry, but the Vikings are much more of sack gurus than the Giants are. And I think that they're going to get home against Caleb. I think they're going to force him to throw bad throws. I know he only has 4 interceptions on the year. Kudos to him with that. And I think that J.J. McCarthy is going to be able to do, more this game and settle in, and they're going to be able to, carve up this bad run defense that the Bears seemingly have as well with Mason and Aaron Jones. And Aaron Jones, a guy who knows the Bears well. So I'm going with the Vikings, contrary to popular belief, I guess. Even though right now, I guess they're not favored. And the Vikings 2.5-point favorites, divisional game, anything could happen, but I'm going Vikings. Texans and Titans. The Texans obviously have a very good shot, somewhat, at being able to compete with Jacksonville for a potential wild card spot. It's still kind of a stretch in the AFC, where there's 3 7-2 teams or whatever it is. And, the Colts have been interesting lately, where it's like, oh, are they going to be a team that's going to be able to hold on? They've looked, a little bit more like, oh, you can compete with this team like Atlanta did last week. And it looked like they honestly might win. But Houston going to Tennessee, a divisional game. Tennessee hasn't had a lot of home games, but clearly bad there. I am going with Houston just because I think that they're the more experienced team, and this is really a must-have unless you're really willing to pack the season away. And 5.5-point odds when you're the away team, pretty good odds. So yeah, I'm going with Houston in this game. Panthers-Falcons. The Falcons obviously suffering a kind of difficult loss last week, where Jonathan Taylor carried the Colts to a overtime victory, and Atlanta looked pretty good. At this point, though, you're really, really, really looking like, hey, we're not going to be able to make the postseason. They didn't think I would be saying that with this talented roster, and they've played better than what their record says. But they just have this weird off and on switch that, I guess, as a Packers fan, I kind of understand. We obviously have more wins, but you look, bad and, in certain games, and you look good in certain games, but you still end up losing that are one possession. But looking at this game, it's definitely a do or die. Like, this is a statement win at this point in the year. Do I think the Falcons win? You know what? No, I actually don't think that they win. Carolina suffered a weird game last week, and that I think that they're looking to make a statement win here, put the kind of, nail in the coffin, and Drake London is somewhat hurt. I know he was dealing with, he was doing good things last week, and then he kind of just got hurt, unfortunately. And I think that the Panthers, I think that they're still trying to develop this passing attack. And if that does come alive with a good running game with Rico Dowdle and Chuba Hubbard, I think that, they could be a sneaky good team if they happen to make it in the playoffs. So I'm going with Carolina in this game. And then we move on to Packers visiting the Giants in New York. Now, this is, a do or die game. I don't fully believe that because you still have 5 division games left. You've only played the Lions, whom you obviously beat, week 1. But if you lose this game, you're looking at 5-4-1, backs up against the wall. They honestly kind of should be at this point in terms of my Packers. Obviously, Xavier McKinney goes to play his former team for the first time since signing with the Packers last year. I think that he's going to play with a bit more zeal, even though he's already obviously a very, very good safety anyways. I think the Packers really need to kind of realize that they need to do a little bit more creative work with the offense. I think that LaFleur doesn't really needs to know that he needs to be able to trust Jordan Love. Hail to Toyotathon, because that's apparently when Jordan Love is good. And Jordan Love, who I still firmly believe in, contrary to what a lot of people say, I just think there's a lot going on with the Packers, and I'm not going to get into it entirely, but I think the O-line hasn't been playing the best. The run game obviously hasn't been, what it was last year. And, despite Jacobs still managing to have 608 yards behind a lackluster O-line, but I think that they really need to realize that this is a game where you may or may not be able to run it, even though the Giants have been very, very bad against the run. It's just one of those things that, New York, new regime, that always seems to me to bring out a breath of fresh air for teams at times, and you get that kind of one game anomaly where, hey, maybe this guy's not the answer at head coach for a long while, but he's able to inspire a team, change up what they're doing, get them excited, because I do think the Giants have a decent amount of talent on that team, and it's not like they're a bottom dweller team like the Titans, who just don't have that much talent, if we're being honest with you. So yeah, I'm picking Green Bay to win this game, but expect kind of a dogfight where the Giants, could surprise. And we haven't seen Jameis Winston yet this year. The guy has been very good against the Packers in the past. Yes, I get it. We've had bad defensive coordinators in the past that he's done well against. But he's one of those guys, to me, that he's going to give you a lot more than Russ, because he's willing to try and fit it down the field. And he's a guy that tends to get yards, even if you aren't really closing games. So he gives his team opportunities that Russell Wilson wouldn't have. I definitely think that, the Packers need to get home on the pass rush to really make sure that they put this game away and move the ball better in the passing attack on offense. But I'm going with the Packers, and please just do it for the fans. Seahawks Rams, the biggest game of the week. And obviously, you're looking at this, Leonard Williams on Rich Eisen's show, and that Leonard Williams is saying game against Rams gets to see a chance to see where we're at. That's a very humble attitude. That is what I would expect by a team led by McDonald, and a game where Seattle obviously has been crazy good on the road. Surprise, you guys, I'm actually picking them to win this game. I think that the Rams have a very, very good defense. I think that Seattle has a very, very good defense. The difference to me that I think about in this game is that I think Seattle's a little bit better. And I think that the Rams, while they have protect Stafford very, very well, I think this is going to be a very gridiron kind of game. And imagine if the Rams weren't at home or whatever else, this would be an even playing field. I think that this is, definitely the biggest game we've had this year. I am picking the Seahawks. Spoiler there, you guys. And I just think that this game is a chance for Darnold to really, really obviously take control of his demons from last year where they lost to the Rams, obviously, when he was on the Vikings, and be able to put them away. And I think that the key to this game, if I'm being honest with you, is the team that is going to be able to run the ball the best. Now, I know we're looking at Puka, JSN, Devontae Adams, the two quarterbacks, which I think are going to have to make some clutch throws. But I overall think that Seattle, with Kenneth Walker and Charbonnet, are going to be able to potentially control this game a little bit better. And if you're having to go, deep or having to get points when you're down on Seattle, I think they have a little bit more of an advantage than the defense of the Rams, which I think is very, very good. And, this game could go any which way. It really is, to me, that it's like we've seen these games with the teams in this division just come down to the wire the last few years. Like, it's pretty ridiculous. And obviously, looking at the records, Arizona's obviously the only team that's really fallen off. And San Fran, despite all their injuries, goodness. And you look at this, I mean, I guess LA, they've let up less points, but they've also taken less. And you look at the, kind of the point differential of what these boys have scored, it's very, very, similar, where it's like, 100 points more for than against. I guess a little bit less with the Rams, but you don't get a much closer game than this. And I think that Seattle, I think that they're going to be able to travel well. I think that they're going to be able to get after Stafford, and it's going to be a tight game. But I'm going with Seattle. I just think that for whatever reason, they've been crazy good on the road. And this could be the statement game. These are my two teams right now that I'm like, these are the teams to beat in the NFC. It's not even a question at this point. But I'm going with Seattle, who's the underdog. But in all honesty, it should be it surprises me that it's like this. It should be a 1-point favorite to one of these teams. But moving on, we have 49ers Cardinals, another big game of, the NFC West. I'm taking the Niners in this game for the sole reason that, hey, whatever team loses, if it is Seattle, and San Fran wins, then you're tied record-wise, and then you're kind of playing this game of who's going to drop a game near the end of the season. What's going to happen? San Fran has obviously been, an injury-riddled team. Mac Jones, I guess I don't even know who's starting this game on their team. It seems kind of ridiculous to me. What is their depth chart looking like? Is it Purdy? It is Purdy. That makes it a little bit more interesting to me, because while he's their guy, he's been so frequently injured off and on that it's like the guy hasn't had a slew of games. I couldn't tell you what full games he's even played this year. And you had Mac Jones out, had been playing well. And the Cardinals had been playing pretty well. They beat, Dallas handedly. And then Seattle really just, mopped the floor with them, which was somewhat surprising, with how close they played them earlier in the year. But you look at the Niners, and they got mollywopped by the Rams last week in a game, that, I definitely didn't expect them to win. But this game, I'm definitely kind of looking strongly at as, obviously playoff implications, where it's like San Fran is still sticking in it despite all the injuries, which is wild. So I'm going with San Fran as a game that, hey, we need to be able to keep up and potentially get ahead of one of these other teams that's leading the division. Now we move on to Ravens-Browns. Not much needs to be said here. Lamar Jackson expected to start. I guess he's still kind of, so he was dealing with another injury. It's interesting, but he doesn't have an injury designation, which is good. I fully expect this game to go and be the game where Baltimore finally gets up to 500. We've talked about how this team, has the most likely odds to win the division, weeks in a row, despite, their record, and they were down. They were beneath Cincinnati. They were obviously beneath Pittsburgh. And I think they were tied with Cleveland at one point. So you look at this, and I think that Baltimore, they really need to, really need to win this game. And I expect them to really put on a show and, make it so that this team and Dillon Gabriel can't really do much. I think we should have seen Shedeur Sanders at this point, because Dillon Gabriel doesn't seem to be giving you that much. Moving on to Chiefs Broncos. This game is interesting. Another kind of toss-up game where it's like, oh, the Chiefs, they could definitely get this game, and, it's not going to make Denver really sweat. Denver obviously perfect at home so far this year, up in Mile High. And people say this is the biggest test. Is Patrick Surtain playing? Let me see this. Well, I see we don't have Singleton in. Is Surtain playing? Obviously, he had been injured. And why am I blind? Oh, and he is out again. Overall, I don't think this affects too much. It isn't like the Chiefs have one of those high-flying kind of receivers that's like, hey, we're going to milk this guy the ball. This guy is going to be the one that you want to cover downfield. Don't get me wrong, there are those guys. But I overall think that, with the safety play that you have, the pass rush that you have, it's one of those things that you don't have to worry about too much. It's not like you're going to have to worry too much about Xavier Worthy burning your team and getting downfield. Oh, I didn't notice that J.K. Dobbins is out. So they have R.J. Harvey and Tyler Batty. R.J. Harvey, I don't think is going to be the workhorse back. So it's going to be interesting what they do there with J.K. Dobbins out. Tyler Batty, I like, but hasn't gotten that much playing time, if we're being honest with you. And then it's like, you do have your fully healthy wide receiver core, which I think is important. Obviously, McDuffie on the other side, and overall a good defense, obviously. But people are kind of saying, oh, this is Kansas City's game. I remember the game in Mile High last year where I was like, oh, yeah, the Broncos finally did it. They finally beat the Chiefs. But lo and behold, they get their kick blocked. You cannot tell me that most of these Denver players do not remember that. So they are coming for blood, and they are coming for Kansas City, who obviously has had a bye last week. And then you kind of look at, kind of their injuries. They don't have Isaiah Pacheco again. Not that to me is a huge blow, I guess. And it's like, and you look at kind of the last games they played, obviously Buffalo, plays the Chiefs tougher than anybody, but the Broncos are kind of there with them. They've been playing the Chiefs tough and trying to get out of their shadow for, years now. And it wasn't until last year that they finally were like, we have, a decent QB that isn't just going to toss the game away and is going to be able to play a close, smart game, and a coach that, has been there and done that. So despite people favoring the Chiefs for whatever reason in this game, I am going with Denver. Side note, you guys, I have a bet on this game. And I guess, I should have mentioned this with Packers, but the bet is that, if the Broncos and the Packers both win for me, obviously tomorrow, I'm getting $20. If one win, one loses, the bet cancels out or whatever else. But yeah, my friend was willing to bet on the Giants and, the Chiefs on this game for $20. So, hey, but, fun times. But in any case, yeah, I think that the Broncos, despite what people are saying, I think that they can win this game. They haven't obviously had the cleanest season and all of that, but I do think that they've had games where they're missing pieces, and, the offense, I think Bo Nix, I wouldn't say he's regressing at all. I would say that I think, it's a sophomore, up and down kind of season. But I think the Broncos can win this thing and have a statement win, because they need to keep winning in order to be potential 1 seeds in the AFC. Lions Eagles Sunday Night Football. The Eagles obviously playing that doozy of a game. No one's talking about it. Everyone's like, oh, the Packers, oh, they had this and this and this and this and this happen. Well, the Philadelphia Eagles, essentially the only reason they scored a touchdown that game was because of, I wouldn't even say 50-50 ball. If you watch the same game that I did, Devontae Smith was well covered. He was well covered, but he does, what he does pretty well is he jumps up and he grabs that thing. He attacks the ball. And without that, Philadelphia loses. And what are we talking about? We're talking about another team that, hey, with A.J. Brown, they did that goofy rogue play that was confirmed this week, where it's like, oh my gosh, yeah, let's give the Packers a shot to tie this thing, you guys. But in any case, the Eagles, they gotta be, they gotta be happy about their record, and that's about as happy as you can say. And they gotta be happy that they were able to get Phillips from Miami for a 3rd rounder, because it seemed like, maybe Miami was like, oh, we can, it's crazy to me that they wanted so much for Waddle, but not so much for Phillips, who wasn't a bad player. But Philadelphia going up against Detroit, they got to be happy it's in Philadelphia. That's all that I'm saying. And Detroit not even being favored, that is wild to me. Now, don't get me wrong. I think, I guess I had picked, I guess, the Eagles earlier in the week. Now, I am going and I am picking the Lions in this game. As much as I'd like them to lose and to be, for it to prove that, hey, this is a team that, like, yeah, they're not going to look good, I do think that they're going to be able to do things and dominate the Eagles and really outscore them. I just don't trust the ability to score on the Eagles. And it's like, even if Detroit has a off game, I think if they put up, 28 or 30, this game's a surefire win. Because what is Philadelphia going to do? They got a pissed off locker room. They got a pissed off wide receiver 1. And they don't have a run game going type of thing. And the Lions, I feel like this is kind of one of their games that you look at that, hey, we're going to come into this game and we're going to slap around a team with a good record. Wouldn't necessarily even say it's a good team. And I think that they have the formula to really make sure that the Eagles aren't going to be able to play to their strengths in this game. So I'm going with Detroit. Even though I really hope the Eagles, surprise me, if I'm being honest with you. Now moving on to Monday night, we got a doozy of a game. We have Cowboys Raiders. Just a kind of disgusting game. This is the game we get back after, that we get on YouTube TV after, the Disney holdout for ABC and ESPN. And this is the game we get it back for. Last week I had to do, the Fubo, the free trial and whatever else. And, to watch my Packers, of course, lose. And then this week, oh yeah, we get this game for free. But lo and behold, it's a doozy. I'm going with Dallas. As much as it, I don't care who wins this. It's such an inconsequential game where it's like, unless Dallas goes on some crazy run, which I do not see them doing, I just don't see it. Perhaps Marshawn Nealon's death will inspire the team. Obviously, we didn't see Dallas last week. They didn't play. And obviously the Raiders, funny enough, last week they played that close game with the Broncos. And yes, I did pick the Broncos, you guys, despite that struggle bus of a game against the Raiders, which I think is another reason why the Broncos will propel and they'll be like, yeah, we're putting this game behind us and we're focusing up on the Chiefs. But regardless of the side notes, Dak Prescott's going to carve the living hell out of the Raiders, and he's going to be able to score quite a bit. And while Ashton Jeanty might have a heyday type of thing, do I think the Raiders are going to be able to cover CeeDee Lamb? They're going to be able to cover George Pickens. They're going to be able to cover, why can't I remember the tight end name for Dallas? Are they going to be able to cover Jake Ferguson? And I just don't see it. You know, this completely healthy, you know, offense of Dallas. Now I'm looking at, you know, their defense, and I guess, you know what, why did I even say that? I totally did, you know, it did actually slip my mind, you guys. I totally forgot that they got Quinnen Williams. You're going to have to run outside on this team because they got Kenny Clark and Quinnen Williams on this D-line. You're going to have to either go after Dante Fowler on the outside or Ezeraku on the outside. And, you know, you better hope that just... You better hope that, you know, this addition really makes it so that your interior D-line is good. Because if it starts to look bad for whatever reason, then yeah, you're looking at Eberflus is running some jank defense. It doesn't stop a thing, despite having the best interior duo in the league at this point. But yeah, I'm going with Dallas because, yeah, I really don't trust the Raiders. And it surprises me that Dallas is only 3.5 point favorites. What, do Cowboys not do well in Vegas? They sure do gamble a lot. But tell me what you guys think about this. Obviously, a good slew of games this weekend, and I'm really excited. I think it's a really good weekend of football. We've had a couple of ones where it's like, man, these are kind of doozy of weekends. Interesting things happening with weird teams that shouldn't losing. But, you know, overall, we got kind of a juicer of a weekend, and I'm really excited. But that'll be it for this episode of CastCast. I want to thank you all for watching, and as always, go Pack Go.